Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We have customers across the world that's jumping on today. Very happy to be here today. It's been a while since we have these meetups. We have these quite often. Uh, previous year, 2 or 3 a year, where we will bring a guest speaker in and just have a conversation about different topics. And this is a forum where you can ask any question you like, and we will try our best to answer it. And this is a forum where many other customers are facing the same challenges, and you guys could share your challenges and see what other customer is using to deal with it. I think this is the way that Microsoft allow us to really have a conversation, and this is really to me a data community. Many of you who's new to DataON, we're very close knitted, and we want to make sure we provide the best support for our customer. Um, as a setup, we want this to be interactive. We do have a guest speaker here who will be here to answer any questions, and I'll let him introduce himself and kickstart the conversation. He'll have some slides, but feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. We have plenty of people here to answer your question, and I'm sure the conversation will take where it goes. Okay. Without further ado, my name is Howard Lowe. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing here at DataON, and it's my pleasure to introduce Alan Kerr, who will be sharing with us the direction of Microsoft a year after they have launched Azure Local last year, Ignite, and where we're going moving forward. Alan Kerr.
Thanks, Howard. Yeah, Alan, I'm a director over here at Microsoft. I cover the adaptive cloud for all the Americas. And so, speaking with Jeff, one of the things we wanted to do is sort of just level set on what was the announcements at Ignite last year, and then what have we done since basically November through now. And then, we'll try and read some tea leaves a little bit and see what we might be able to expect for the coming Ignite. So if anyone's going, typically there's a lot of big announcements around Ignite. I am surprised that some of the things are coming out. So I announced yesterday or maybe it was this morning, so some things went GA. I would have assumed they would have saved that for Ignite, but we'll talk about that as we go through it. So Ignite last year. Last year was a big change, and it was sort of an acknowledgement and pivot away from this idea that the edge means tiny edge, small devices way out, on the other side of data centers and that kind of stuff, and sort of reformulating and absorbing Azure Stack HCI into a larger strategy called Azure Local. And so the announcements there were really sort of the decision for Microsoft to basically allow Azure to run anywhere. That's really kind of the key. And so as part of those sort of that sort of initiative, and really sort of the combining of multiple product lines, namely Azure Stack HCI, which is kind of the public one that everyone knew, right? So that was one of the announcements. Azure Stack HCI would roll over into Azure Local via an update process. The additional functions that were going to be coming were basically being pulled from our Azure Stack Edge product, our Azure Stack Hub product, and our Azure Operator Nexus, which most people have not heard of, right? So that was really sort of the vision of what we're doing. And so as part of that, we announced a couple of things. So one was obviously our connected servers version is basically what we renamed Azure Stack HCI from, and took those features and functions and made that. We announced Azure Migrate, and so that was a migration tool that would take your virtual machines from obviously a VMware environment, put them into Azure Local. The key for this is it had a process called hydration, and so once it moved it over, it would poke it into Azure for you, and then you could see it out of the gate. If you just did sort of east-west migrations, either backup restores or copies or whatever you want to do, that secondary function didn't happen, right? And so that was a big thing for Azure Migrate. For anyone who follows me on LinkedIn, you would have seen I posted that it's actually gone GA. So that's actually GA as of yesterday. Azure Migrate for VMware to Azure Local is generally available today. I know some customers, like I said, even though as we were talking prior to the call, they sort of view, well, if it's public preview, then that's not GA, then we won't use it. So a lot of customers were waiting for the GA, even though the code wasn't changing. Well, that's now occurred, so they can then move forward. The other thing we announced is that sort of I would like to say sort of the democratization of Kubernetes service. So we announced that it's always been part of the system, but we used to charge for it. We made it free, right? And so actually, I think free is the wrong word. It's included in the prices. That is how they want us to say it. But basically, it's now available at no cost as part of an Azure local environment. We announced disconnected operations. So this was really for a lot of the customers that need something to be not only air gapped, but this was actually from our hub product. And so our hub product was originally our disconnected operations platform that you would run. The key difference, or one of the key differences, is that even on the hub platform that was disconnected, you still had to connect once a year, right? Well, in the new sort of disconnected operations version, it can be permanently offline, right? So you can actually sideload forever, right? So you don't need to connect up. So that's it. The other thing we announced was new form factors, right? And the new form factors were really, and I'll talk about in the next one, but the new form factors were really particularly around the small form factor stuff that we announced. And so we see a lot of ruggedized and IoT type interest in that. And so, anytime someone says, oh, basically they would use a PC for that thing, that's where we see sort of small form factor. We've had tons of interest. We had a large, restaurant chain that wanted to cut 30 seconds off every car in the drive-thru, right? And so what they did was they deployed small form factor with Azure Local to basically do optical recognition of license plates, so they can sort of track, how long people are in the thing, and then aggregate the data and say, are we being successful or not, and things like that, and basically drop one in every drive-thru, right? So, another example of the small form factor stuff was that. Charging stations, right? So a good example that would be something like a Tesla charging station. They wanted to drop one of these units into each of the charging units. And so instead of the failing over to the site, they could fail over at the pump level, right? So each individual pump had its own sort of processing capability and that kind of stuff. So interesting applications, but that was one. So that was sort of a preview on the left there. Connected servers, which is formerly Azure Stack HCI. The one on the left was actually what would be our Azure Stack Edge product line, which is the Microsoft first-party subscription service. That's now small form factor Azure versions there. The connected servers, which is what most people have most of the time. Disconnected operations, which is the one on the right there. That's the one, like I said, that will never see sort of light of day. And then there's actually sort of some large-scale stuff that was hinted at, but not necessarily explicitly stated that we were going to see more of that come out. What this really does is this really kind of, the other thing that was kind of, depending on, when you're traveling around at night, was this was really kind of the doubling down on the adaptive cloud sort of piece and sort of where it fits. And so the idea that you're seeing very recently how this kind of fits down to this idea of, you can do these, very localized, very small, single CPU type stuff for IoT. And then as you kind of scale up, I can scale up globally using Azure as my, for example, the Azure control plane. One of the reasons we're going towards that is essentially the unlimited scalability around how many nodes, objects, and everything else we can have in it. So when a customer comes to us and says, hey, I've got 100,000 of these things, how do I manage that easily? Well, that's the way you would do it rather than sort of on-prem tooling. Especially when those are sort of spread around the planet. So that's sort of your scale this way. And then you've got your compute scale that kind of goes up this way, right? And so as you go from that sort of localized, this could even be sort of Copilot plus PCs, IoT devices, those kind of things, is scaling up over your Azure local clusters on DataON, and then all the way out to Azure if you want to do some stuff out there. For those of you paying attention, we just produced the Fairwater data center. The capability of that is 10 times faster than the fastest supercomputer on the planet. So it's about 17 exaflops, a second, all that kind of stuff. So right now we have, and we'll see that next year, but we have number one, number two, 3, and 4 right now, El Capitan, Aurora, and Frontier, which are all owned by the Energy Department. And below that is Eagle, which is also a Microsoft supercomputer that we have. But we've got like 45 of them or something like that, right? And so that's actually what OpenAI runs on, if anyone's interested. So it's all that kind of capability that we're building. We're really sort of democratizing that capability. So if you do need that level of processing capability, yeah, it's out there and you can have it, right? But you don't need to buy the whole computer. You can just rent a piece of ours. And so that's what we're doing. So it really kind of fits into this kind of strategy of you can scale down as small as you need to go, and you can scale up as big as you need to go, and manage it all throughout that sort of single control plane with a common security model and all those kind of things. The other thing this kind of conforms into is one of the things we doubled down on this year was that publicly you can go look at our SFI initiative. So we basically got our Secure Future initiative, and then we got our quality excellence initiative. And a lot of the work that you've seen, particularly in the last 6 to 8 months around the Azure local platform, has really been around getting the product up to where it needs to be, so it doesn't go in for essentially daily review, right, of what's going on. And so there's really kind of 5 pillars around the quality excellence sort of initiative. So the first one is sort of that platform resiliency aspect, whereby it's like not only do we have to sort of withstand failures, but also recover quickly if there is a failure, right? So that's one thing. Change management aspects. So, as we're doing sort of code changes, one of the things that we fell a little bit victim to was that the desperation of the customer saying, hey, I need to get off this other hypervisor now, I need these functions, and us delivering that in a fashion that was wasn't necessarily conforming to all our historical way that we would have done it, right? Because we were just trying to solve that customer problem. And so that led to some quality issues, right? Well, that's all been reined in, ring fenced, and it's all been put back with now sort of the purview directly from Scott Guthrie, who's head of engineering for all of Microsoft, right? And so all of this gets that kind of visibility. We also have kind of the service health and incident management piece of this, whereby it's like we make sure that we can manage incidents better and reduce downtime and detect problems faster, which is where a lot of the telemetry comes from. So obviously, if you can engineer out of it, that's going to be the first thing. So don't have the problem in the first place. If you do have a problem, how do we sort of resolve that quick? One of the things that we've seen customers do around that is using things like Copilot for Azure and things like that, to whereby some customers have a bit of a technical debt that's being created by not having the infrastructure stuff they used to. They're able to replace some of that capability with some of the Copilot for Azure and things like that, being able to ask it questions about what's going on. Just the various availability things and sort of that customer health thing where we want to sort of advise customers more on how do we create, and DataON does a good job at this, but making sure that they're aware of how do you build a highly available system? How do you build it with disaster recovery into it? How do you do that, right? Because a lot of people are coming off sort of infrastructure ways of doing things that you shouldn't necessarily do if you want to keep the system online more often, or keep that uptime to where it needs to be. And so not only are we developing technologies to create that sort of level of availability, but we're also making sure that we're advising customers, hey, don't just go put single nodes everywhere, things like that. If you're going to put 2 nodes in, make sure you're doing nested mirroring, things like that, right? So it's all that kind of advice on making sure that they're aware of what's going on. So that's really kind of the quality initiative.
Al, I think it's very important that you put this slide up. I think there are new customers here today. We have a great audience, and we have a lot of existing customer. And and I know we had this conversation from for the last 9 months. When Microsoft launched Azure Local, and if we go back from November to today, product continue to improve, but there are challenges that we face on updating. And it's okay to talk about the challenges because I always tell customer, not every technology is 100%. You have to work through and learn about it. But the updating process to make this product robust, feature capable, all the feature you want to have customer, really meant that there was some area that you guys, did not get to what you guys want to in terms of excellence. And us as a partner of yours and you as a Microsoft and our customer had to struggle through it. I think we're at a really good place, and I'm really happy that Microsoft's absolutely committed to the reliability and the excellence of your product, because moving forward, all the existing customer and new customer are dependent on the fact that this product will be, I will say, rock solid, right, while delivering the feature. I think that's very, very important to articulate.
So there's two components to this, right? When we talk about not only the security, the secure future initiative, but also the quality excellence initiative, right? Every now and again, Sachi gets out there and he says some stuff. But one of the quotes that kind of that stuck with me was and you can see this internally, right? Is that without trust, we don't have permission to move forward, right? So so I'm not giving a new feature if it's not secure. Right, I'm not, see people come and say, hey, we want to do this thing, right? And it's like, well, we can't do that because it's not secure. Once it's secure, yes, we can give it to you. Once it's hit our quality marks for, the 99th percentile for these things, then yes, we can give it to you. But gone are the days of this sort of rapid fire, we need to solve this problem, because once again, what we're actually eroding is trust. Right, and without that, like all of Microsoft runs on trust, right? That's sort of the thing, and so we have to build that into it, which is why, I kind of, I mention this because a lot of people just are unaware it's even happening, right? This is an enormous thing. Security-wise, the Secure Future Initiative really has sort of these, the core principles behind it is that, secure by design, secure by default, and then we have the secure operations piece, which is also mainly on the Microsoft side, but that's just sort of part of everything we do. And so it's really a matter of how do we protect, for example, our supply chains? How do we protect, so that way you're getting a secure product, right? And so historically, and people probably heard me talk about this, whereby we used to deliver a product that was it has round numbers about 250 odd security settings that you can use. And we would send it out, and people would turn on close to none of them, and then complain when they got hit by something. And so we kind of went to zero trust model, to whereby we basically turn on all of our about 4 of the things, the 4 which might cause a problem. And so you're secure by default out of the box, right? And so when some people say, why can't I do this? It's preventing me. It's like, no, you have to turn that off, right? In order to enable that function. The simple version I would give you, which is not a Azure local thing, is that, for example, macros are turned off in all of the office related stuff. You can turn it on, and I can run individual ones, those kind of things. But by default, the default position is no, you can't. Right? You'd have to go and change that if that's something that you want to do. Well, that's basically what we're doing with every product all the time, including our own internal stuff. Right? The security aspect to this is that every Microsoft employee actually has a separate measurable sort of line item that you get measured on in performance reviews and all this kind of stuff, that is basically a security baseline, right? And it's like, what did you do to improve the security of Microsoft individually? What did you do? Show us what you did. And so you have to think about this constantly, right? Which is why I'm like Howard the other day, we were discussing that document. Can I send this out? Let me get approval that I'm able to send this out prior to me just sending out, things like that, because it may have some information in there that we don't want out, things like that. I cut and paste things right now on my desktop, and it actually does an information protection scan of what I'm even cutting and pasting, things like that. So it's everything all the time in relation to the security. So we're taking it extraordinarily seriously. Is anything going to be perfect? No, but we need to get rid of as many holes as possible. And what we're looking for, and as you can see down the bottom, is that continuous improvement, right? It's like, however good it is today, it's going to be better. It's going to be better next time. A lot of the features that are coming out in Azure Local, specifically around security, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that's basically sort of the two things that not specifically for Azure Local. This is all Microsoft products, but it definitely highlighted itself this year with Azure Local, with some of the attention we got around, the product not being from a update quality or a first time install, metric wasn't where it needed to be, and it got executive level sort of EVP attention, EVP attention around that. So Azure Local itself, this is how it's thought about within Microsoft, right? It's just this is from Scott Guthrie. This is directly from him. We're running Azure on premises, right? So you can operate secure and scale with the power of Azure. It's also the foundation of all of our sovereign private cloud initiatives. So particularly in Europe, there's a lot of conversation around that. I had some conversations yesterday with various government agencies in Canada. They're interested in this kind of stuff. The U.S. government's interested in this, particularly in foreign countries where they're operating. And so there's a lot of discussion around sort of sovereign private clouds these days because of the political climate and what's going on out there. But at the end of the day, it's really whether it's a connected version or a disconnected version. The idea, the sort of the North Star, the view of this is just Azure wherever you need it, right? So I view it as when people say Azure native or a public cloud, that's in a Microsoft data center. If you're saying Azure local, all I hear is that you're outside of Microsoft data center. Right? I don't distinguish between data center, colo, edge location, factory, satellite, you name it. It's all the same. It's just kind of what, Humvee driving around the desert. It's all a matter of just what hardware are you running and what kind of connectivity you got to that thing. So, one of the things that, Satya has pointed out, because one of the things that has come up is like, well, is this just a flash in the pan? Are we doing this just for kicks and giggles for a year and then we'll go do something else? And it's like, no, what we're actually doing is this is part of the core Azure strategy. And so Satya, and once again, this is all public, you can go look these up. He basically has said that Azure Local is the core part of the Microsoft hybrid strategy, right? It's basically extending the Azure to any environment. That's really what we're, doing. Arc is kind of that connective tissue or that projection sort of service. And this was basically the major theme of Ignite, right? This was the sort of the when he's on stage talking about this is what it's about. It's the key for the sovereign clouds. I kind of already mentioned this, but there's been a lot of talk this year, particularly in June. So June 16th, there was a big announcements in a tour of Amsterdam around the Microsoft Sovereign Cloud Initiative. This is the foundation for all of that, right? And so this isn't going to be a flash in the pan if it's the foundation of what it is we're going to be doing in these remote, say in Europe, and also for the US government. And it's also, there's this acknowledgement now that, and you can kind of see this in the European speech, and there's a little bit in the UK speech around, it's a customer empowerment and choice, right? And so we're reiterating that Microsoft's mission is to empower every organization. Well, as part of that, it's choice, right? So you can deploy your Azure services on your terms, whether it's connected or disconnected, on your hardware, at the location you need, right? That's what that looks like. That's empowerment, right? It's not just, well, you can do, it's not the Henry Ford Model T version. You can have whatever color you want as long as it's black. It's no, you can actually run this where you want to run it. Right, and so this is really sort of the foundation and the strategy of what we're talking about. And once again, if Scott Guthrie's talking about this and Satya is talking about this, this is basically the organization itself is talking about this. The most recent one, at least from memory, other than sort of the press interviews and stuff, was the $22 billion or the $30 billion announcement for the AI investment in the UK. That Microsoft is doing. That was on September 16th. It's the tech propensity deal that they were talking about between the UK and US. Satya had mentioned Azure Local specifically in that. He did like a minute and a half sort of, hey, here's what we're doing. that was on LinkedIn, and I think it hit the news. But he actually mentioned, he called out Azure Local specifically as the foundation for all of that work, right? All the AI Foundry and everything else that's going to be happening over there. So that's all great. That's kind of, where we're at. So let's look at, what we've done since, since Ignite sort of 24. So we kind of set the stage of where we're at. And like, as I was kind of saying, I didn't realize how much we'd actually done until Jeff said, go figure out all the stuff that we've done since last Ignite. So I had to go back and have a look at what we actually did. And so around management, here's some of the things we did. So we sort of enabled Arc enabled software-defined networking and network security groups. And so this was kind of a big thing. We used to have it as a separate VM and all that kind of stuff. Now it's just basically part of the infrastructure. And so we're able to take, for example, network VMs, right? So it's not just piping things through VMs and that kind of stuff. And that sort of integration piece is actually one of the reasons why we no longer have these standalone Hyper-V server version from 2019. The reason that didn't make it into 2022 and beyond is that customers were asking for a lot of these capabilities, but didn't want to have sort of, I'll just run all of these separate VMs to do this. They wanted to integrate it as part of the infrastructure so they can do, micro-segmentation and all those other kind of things. The other big one was the Arc gateway, right? And so this is also the reason that, we can't have nice things, and they took away stretch clustering. But it's really a matter of sort of drastically reducing this problem, right? It's listening to the customer feedback, which says, why do I have to have hundreds of, sort of positions open in my firewall rules? Why can't I just have sort of, a small or reduced number of endpoints? And that's really what the Azure Arc Gateway sort of came about. Now, this wasn't just a matter of turning on an edge thing. We actually had to do a lot of work on the Azure side to support this, and that's why it, sort of isn't there out of the gate. And also, when you look at something like stretch clustering, we have to have this available on two sides, right? And so it's how do we solve that, right? And so that's where we're doing a lot of work around, Arc workload portability and those kind of things. But the real key was reducing it from hundreds of sort of endpoints to I think it's less than 30 now is where we're at for that. Unifying management, it was really, the update management was really about we used to have separate ways of doing things for integrated nodes and validated nodes and all these kind of things. It's really about unifying everything into an infrastructure, software package whereby you get your host updates, your firmware drivers, the Azure local runtime, all that thing in one package, right? That's really what that is. As well as sort of everyone getting onto the latest, moving from the Azure Stack HCI base to sort of the Azure Core OS base, from the 11x to 12x from those update standpoints was another thing in streamlining, all of that. The new local OS is another big one, right? So we went, to basically the Core OS, right? So the Core OS, the Azure Core OS is the same that we run in Windows 2025. It's the same that now runs in Azure Local, that's now fully complete as of 2509, which is the latest release, and it's the same that we run in our Azure Core, OS. So all of the security improvements, all of the update optimizations that we have in that, a lot of the performance, really comes from that. And then we got some the improved portal and some automation stuff in that. It's really a matter of enabling, so all the ARM templates and Bicep and those kind of things, and anything that's sort of newly published into the resource manager, being able to use those, as well as some GUI updates. We did save and pause VMs and those other kind of things that we've really was sort of 2508 on. We had a lot of those kind of things useful for maintenance and power savings and that, and it also ties back to some of our other stuff around for AVD and those kind of things. So that's really, once again, done a lot of work on management. Sort of, there's a lot of customer feedback. Every now and again on LinkedIn, I'll send out a what do you call it, like a form that says, hey, come have your say on this particular subject, and you can go in there and you can say it. We do collect all that data, we do aggregate it, and then basically whatever customers say they want, we go build. right? So it's not just talking to specific customers. It's actually just going out and getting sort of a wide sort of understanding of, well, hey, there's a lot of people running this. What sort of the masses want, right? Do you want more dashboards? Do you want more this? Do you want more that? Right? So that's really part of it. We did a ton of work around sort of the resiliency and the data protection stuff. Obviously, this is a core thing that people want. Not just obviously, I want my system itself to be reliable, but I also, in the event that my environment itself falls into a big hole, I want to have various protections around that. So we did some work around backup integration. So the Microsoft Azure backup service is part of this. And so you can go, you obviously back up just locally. You can go to Azure, or you can do some kind of hybrid, combination thereof. That's there. We did announce the Hyper-V replica for Azure Local and Preview. This gets really interesting when you start talking about integrating the capabilities of Arc workload portability. Right, so this is in preview right now, but this will get real interesting sort of in 2026, right? In a bunch of the things that we're going to do around there. So right now it isn't, you can get the, and this is also sort of a component of the rack-aware clustering that's out there. So rack-aware clustering, we did work with a customer out there that basically had a true zero downtime requirement, right? And so they basically not only have protection within sort of the all the nodes, they have protection within the racks, and then they have protection across rooms within the same campus. And so we worked with them to get to what they wanted to see around latency requirements and between in regards to milliseconds and that for all the rack-aware clustering and that. So we worked directly with the customer that had the sort of the biggest version of this problem. And that's where the rack-aware clustering sort of came from as part of that. We also announced the ASR. Howard, you mentioned that early on, the Azure Site Recovery. So, it's really the DR solution that's leveraging Azure as part of this. So we're replicating the Azure local VMs up to an Azure region somewhere. I would point out that this is yes, you can turn it on. Yes, it's, you can use it together with some of the other technologies we've got out there. But it's I like anything, right? It's a point in time, right? It's a work in progress. The North Star of this is really the once again, get closer to a point and click version of this. Right click on a VM, just say protect, right? That's ultimately where it's going. And then we've got sort of along with the multi-rack sort of cluster and the rack-aware clustering, it's really this idea that we're creating local availability zones. That's really kind of the idea of extending some of those cloud ways of thinking down to on-prem and have people rethink a little bit about how architecture works, because one of the things that's interesting and part of the reason we even have Azure nodes or Azure local nodes today is that we had a situation where the biggest of the big, you can kind of figure out who that might be, came to us and said, you've built an environment that's significantly bigger than we're ever going to do, right? I mean, Azure is enormous. Tell us how you did it and just tell us that. Right? And that's in part where basically the Azure node sort of concept came from. And so as part of that, sort of if you look at a V2 or V3 or V4 of that, it's extending some of those other things that we're doing within the data center or within Azure that you don't see down to, on-prem. And so that's when you're going to start seeing, talk around local availability zones and those kind of things sort of show up. Security and compliance, obviously, this is a hot topic. There's never going to be less stuff. We're always going to be doing more and more stuff around security. The big one was recently, sort of the preview was the trusted launch VMs. So it's sort of combining that, secure boot, right, and the virtualization-based security on the Gen 2 VMs, and also including VM attestation as part of this with the Azure attestation service. And so basically when something's booted up, we know it hasn't been messed with, right? It's really what it comes down to. The other thing we're doing is we're kind of forcing, so secure core only used to be required for integrated systems now. Right now, some vendors just did it across the board anyway, some didn't. We're now requiring that for all nodes. So all nodes now have to be secure core, and you can obviously leverage the other encryption-based stuff that's, the BIOS, the TPM, secure boot, driver security, all those things, as well as key vault management. And so we've got internal key vault management. With Arc, we can also do external key vault management, which is really sort of one of the reasons we brought key vault down out of Azure is to support the sovereign cloud initiatives, right? So you can either use your own Key Vault, you can use our Key Vault. We did once again, I've already mentioned this, but the government and sovereign cloud enablement is a big thing. We kind of hinted at it in late 24, but it's been in public preview, and a lot of it's just gone GA in the US government today. So that was a big thing. And then obviously on the 16th, we announced not only the sovereign private cloud sort of initiatives, but we also had the announcement of Microsoft 365 local as part of that, which was one of those things. It's like, well, if I'm going to do this private cloud, I want to be able to take this stuff and put it on the other side. And lastly, we had some performance and scale, things that we did. One of the things that is going to that new sort of base code, right? The Azure Core OS, that brought some very big storage performance boosts. Plus, we can leverage some components within, for example, the Sapphire Rapids and the Genoa processors from AMD. You can leverage some of those newer capabilities so we can get more efficient storage replication. Significantly higher IOPS. We're looking at the kernel can now do like 6 million IOPS. In various scenarios, as well as support for Azure Boost, DPU offload cards for SmartNICs and that kind of stuff. So tons and tons of performance, because we're now getting into environments where customers are saying, hey, I need this to be an ultra high performance sort of environment that I'm putting out there. Workloads and ecosystem. Obviously, the 800-pound gorilla is AVD. It wasn't just hey, we're running AVD and now we're good. There's continuous improvements. Jacob Haub, anyone who's sort of on this on a regular basis has seen sort of, we're constantly producing new features and functions around, for example, start on connect. So the VMs can be off and they boot up when a user attempts to connect, things like that. We moved a whole lot of it into a full support, with all the official guidance around, how to use, network security groups and all those kind of things. But it's, the end user computing scenarios are just, enormous, right? It's we've got every hospital talking to us. We've got, all of the government. It's everyone, right? Anyone that basically seemed to have had a Citrix and or a Horizon, now a Omnissa environment, particularly the larger customers had both, right? And they're like, this is the customers telling us we've got, problems with, they're not doing the innovation that they used to do. The prices are going up, the support's going down, like all of these kind of things. And we want to move in sort of the opposite direction, right? We want to make sure that our support's going up, our reliability is going up. We're holding the line on price, or making it more cost effective, things like that. Data services and apps. The thing for me is that, Arc enabled data services, right? So you got managed instance, you got Postgres, SQL, Hyperscale, and you got all these other ones. The way I kind of look at it is that, that if you look at our IoT operation service and all of these other things, if it really says Arc enabled, you can run it on Azure Local, right? So you don't need to look for Azure Local specific stuff. And we're constantly producing more stuff as it relates to, what can be run at the edge. So, for example, the AI inferencing services, right? So we got AI video inferencing and all that kind of stuff. It's in private preview, but yeah, you can go turn that on. And then we've also got our Azure Local, the Microsoft 365 local integration. Once again, this is really a sovereign cloud sort of play. You wouldn't typically do this if you weren't going to just do it offline. It doesn't make a ton of sense. It makes more sense to use the online version for a bunch of reasons that we can kind of talk about. But it's really sort of the combination of giving you sort of the mail capability for like Exchange, SharePoints, those kind of things on site. That's what it really thinks. And whether it's a private environment or just an Azure disconnected environment is what that really comes down to. And lastly is our Edge AI services. So I mentioned this a little bit, but our most recent release of Azure Local did come with, sort of the, RAG generation and all those kind of stuff, the AI-based RAG. And so, we do it with the cognitive search and form recognize and all these kind of things on-prem. This is one of the things that customers are coming to us and saying, hey, yeah, I've got these VMs. I've done all my regular migration. Now I want to start doing some more stuff with this. And that's where some of these other services sort of start coming into play. When we look at it, we've really got sort of a ton of services out there, right? And so this is once again another point in time. This is what's available today. You've really got stuff that sort of is processed in the cloud but with local data. I've got stuff that is running local, it's processed local with local data, and then I've got stuff that runs offline in a disconnected sort of environment, right? So that's where I can run my Microsoft 365 local and things like that. You can run it on the other side of the app environment. And so, once again, is that this is available today. If you came back and asked me in 6 months, then this would look very different. There'd be more icons up there with more things we're doing. We're constantly kind of adding to this. But as you can see, there's a lot of things out there that solves, at least for most customers, most of the time, there's something already out there that we can either do. A great example of something we moved was Key Vault, right? So you can see we've got Key Vault here, we've got Key Vault here, and you can run Key Vault up here in the cloud. And so that was one of the things that was initially cloud only, right? And we then moved it to Azure Local Connected, and we then moved it to a disconnected model. And simply to support all these other scenarios we want. And so that was a customer demand thing. As customers said, well, wait a minute, I need to go run that. We're like, well, wait a minute, let's move that, right? Other things may not make as much sense, right, to move. Some of the things you'll never be able to run sort of, locally. For example, Cosmos DB, you'll never have enough hardware to go and run that, right? And so you would just basically shortcut your data up there and run it up there. But once again, all kinds of services out there. The North Star of this is that basically you can run the service of any service. Does it run locally or remote? That would depend on, some hardware capabilities, but you can run any Azure service anywhere you want is really kind of the view of this. One of the things that I do get asked a fair bit about, so I put it in here, is the AI Foundry piece. And so we now have AI Foundry local, and really this is sort of part of a continuum of being, basically the idea is that, running the AI where your data is. And so it's cloud controlled hybrid infrastructure as part of it. So yes, it's running all the Azure Core OS for Azure Local, but we're running the models and everything else on-prem that you can kind of pull down from the catalog, right? And so, this is really for all the people that have, data sovereignty, compliance, just super paranoid, whereby they want to, without sending data to the cloud, how do I get that same capability on-prem, right? Ideally, is for like disconnected operations and stuff like that. So offline and air gapped, we kind of see this showing up as well. Performance and latency, hardware flexibility, or the AI sort of model catalog and access. You can run different models at different points. Sometimes running certain models in certain areas, runs better. A great example, and I was working on this with yesterday, and so this is basically just AI, right? So this is AI from a Copilot plus PC all the way out to the cloud. It's really just applying AI wherever the customer's data is, right? And so what we found is, for an example, we have on the end user device here with AI, they had a small language model that was basically processing language in real time. And so what we found is that when they were sending it back to the cloud, we weren't getting an answer back fast enough, right? Whereas if they process it in real time, the speech recognition on the device, we could then only send back the answers to the cloud for, aggregation across all the various sites. And so this was, doctors and patients were doing this. And we had financial people doing this, where they were doing real-time sort of translation of the conversation, and then it was helping them with their job. And it was really a matter of running the model where it makes most sense. And so whether it's, on the device itself, in Azure Local, or, out in Azure, you're really just sort of saying, hey, I don't need to move the data. I can apply that model to, where it's sitting. So based on all the previews and all those kind of things that you can see out there, we can kind of look a little bit forward and say, well, what kind of, what do we really expect for, 2025? And once again, can't give anything away, but what I would expect to look for is that, well, hey, some of those preview things may not be preview anymore, right? And so I would look for a lot of that. So a lot of stuff's going GA, and then a lot of stuff that's going from private preview that most people haven't heard of are going to be showing up in a public preview. So then you'll get access to it, and you'll be able to use that in a, once again, you'll be able to get Microsoft support on all of those things and be able to, use them in your environment if that's something that you want to do. And so, like I said, I've seen a list of the announcements. It looks really good. But we're going to, like I said, none of this is, a lot of this has a long runway, right? So none of it's sort of, just show up out of nowhere. You're going to see it being announced, and once again, private preview to public, public to GA. And so you're going to see some stuff. And once again, is that after Ignite, we continue working on this, right? So there's, it doesn't just stop till the next Ignite, much like you saw all the other announcements. Yes, there's a bunch of other stuff coming after Ignite, some of which will be announced, but then it will go, public preview and GA throughout the year as you come. One of the more exciting ones I'm looking forward to is things like confidential compute and that kind of stuff. I've got a lot of customers who are very interested in doing, particularly around supply chain attacks and compromised admins, is how do I protect my workloads from my admins, whether they've been compromised knowingly or not. And so that's going to be interesting. But that's coming up next year. So that's all I had for this, and we can open up to questions, or we can take off early, whatever you want to do. Howard, back to you.
Looks like.
Thank you, Alan. That was actually really, really good. The fact that you summarized what was announced, I think. For me, it's a continuum of innovation that we have to work to make sure everything works properly for our customers. So I think this is a great opportunity to summarize and hopefully hear a lot of new stuff in Ignite in November. We do have some questions. We'll ask some questions too. So we'll start with the one that Joe asked. And the question actually says, will there be specific Azure local security management, i.e. Defender for Azure local coming out, or is that available?
I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen anything specific around that, but I also haven't looked. So okay. I need to go and have a look.
On the same topic, security, I think this topic came up with 3 or 4 customers. I just want to make sure I clarify. I know even some of the customers here on the call asked the question. How does Microsoft treat third-party security software such as CrowdStrike? Do you support it? Do you not support it? I know I kind of have an answer, and Alan, you could kind of reinforce it. I'll say it, you can say yes. The reality is, unless it's validated, Microsoft always said they will support third-party software, but however, you have to go through the validation process to make sure it's on the certification list. So a product such as CrowdStrike, should work in a Windows environment, but Microsoft and DataON is not testing it today, right? We don't have a CrowdStrike loaded. So the validation is incumbent upon the third party to validate for Azure Local as OS to make it work. But as a product, it should work on Azure Local. Is that kind of correct, Alan?
I mean, essentially, yeah. So basically what happens is we deliver the framework that says, here's what you need to test against. If you test against this framework and it, complies or it works or it's whatever it needs to do, you can then claim that it works. But we haven't done that work, yep. Right? So Microsoft has not done it. So the fact that you come out and claim that it works, that's a you thing, not an us thing. And so if it doesn't work, right, you do have to go back to that vendor and say, hey, this doesn't work. They gave you the framework, and it's not working for whatever reason. And it would be up to them, that company, to come to us to say, hey, this should work, and this is a bug on your side. The customer can't come to us. That vendor would have to come to us. CrowdStrike, as the example, come to us and say, hey, this needs to be addressed on your side. Because you're not complying to the instructions that you gave us or the test that you gave us.
Got it. Jacob, you could do the question Q&A. Go ahead.
Yeah, the next one's from Tayton. When you disable security drift control, what wins, the security baseline or a GPO if there's a setting conflict?
I don't know. Need to ask. Jacob,
we'll take that. Yeah, MVP.
Yeah, I didn't have the answer for that one either.
No, I'd have to go and ask.
We'll take the action to go ask. Peyton, go ahead. Next one.
It should be hopefully much easier from Peter. Any news on VM hydration?
Yes, early next year. is that we've done all the testing, but you should see some stuff early next year around that specifically. So that's around. I mentioned Arc portability a bunch of times. That's really around that type conversation, and how we had to engineer. We had to basically do some fancy engineering to get that to work, essentially. But you should see some stuff early next year for that.
For rest of the audience, why is this topic important and sensitive? Is one of the key differentiator, in my opinion, for Microsoft when we go to Azure Local is ability to have your VM essentially managed as a single pane of glass from Azure Arc, right? You could do security, you could do create new VM, move VM, but it has to be talking to Azure as an Arc capability. When you move VM across or from a local to local, sometimes they're not Arc to it. When you create new VM, you create from Azure, it becomes an Arc VM. But how do you get that VM hydrated into Arc or Microsoft Azure so you can manage it? That's the hydration piece of it. And that's a huge, huge ask that every single customer is talking to Microsoft, and Microsoft trying to make it easy and simple to do. That's why it is taking longer than it should be. So as Alan alluded to, sometime early next year, the goal is to get it out, but it is I would say it's a number one priority as a feature for Microsoft to get it out.
It's one of those things that from the outside, you say, what's so hard? Just turn it on, right? But from the engineering side, it's a much bigger challenge of how you actually do it, right? And so we've figured that out, we've tested it, we got it working. But now we have to go through all the regression testing and everything else to make sure it actually does what it's supposed to do. But we've got the mechanism on how we're going to do it, and so I would say watch out for early next year. You'd see some stuff around
that. Next up from Noah, looking for information on the integrations with Azure Local and Copilot.
So Copilot is you're going to see that on the workloads, not with Azure Local itself. Azure Local itself is going to stay on the Azure Copilot for basically infrastructure side. So the Copilot for what's it called now? Copilot for Azure. I think it's just been simplified to right. That like Azure Local shows up in that. And I did kind of mention that that's really one of the things people are going to be using in order to get rid of, or bridge that technical gap that some people have in their organizations, and speed, resolution, particularly through help desk and that kind of stuff. So that's that. Copilot, as it relates to data and those kind of things, you're going to see Copilot agents and stuff show up, whereby I can then sort of turn on not just all the data that's in so Microsoft 365, but all the my on-prem file servers and everything else. So it's basically a uniform search, uniform analytics, uniform all the things that relate to Copilot, on that side. So I'd say watch this space. As for AI automation, that kind of stuff, that's really an AI Foundry on local conversation. I would start looking at that. That's where all of that stuff's going to be.
Yep. And as far as the Azure portal stuff, that's a lot of that's there today. If you go to do something and it fails, there's going to be a nice big Copilot button there, and it'll go try and figure it out for you. And with varying success depending on the problem. A lot of simpler stuff like, oh, you couldn't delete this storage account. Well, that's because this box is checked. Do you want me to go uncheck that for you and then try and delete it again? Yes. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Dennis has some questions about the IP addressing for Kubernetes. So upon initial deployment of Azure Local, they're unable to configure the CIDR ranges they'd like to use for Kubernetes with kubeadm. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Will that be available in the future? Once again, don't know. I need to go ask the people working on that. That's not something I've looked into.
Next one is around which Microsoft 365 functionalities and features will be available on Azure Local.
Exchange, SharePoint, and messaging, which will be Skype for Business. That's basically what Azure M365 Local will be. Before anyone gets sort of wildly excited about that, there's going to be very heavy configuration requirements around how those clusters are built and how they're separate and this and that and blah, blah, blah. So before anyone gets too excited about M365 Local, start saving, because you're going to need to give Howard a bigger number than you think you're going to give him, number one. Number two is that it's not all of Microsoft 365, right? It is a subset. And for example, you're not going to get Teams, which is one of the number of requests. You're going to get Skype for Business and its things, which still runs today. I mean, Skype for Business is a legitimate on-prem thing that still runs today. But that's, as for the 365 local conversation, that's basically what it is. The Exchange will be Exchange SE, right? So that will be the sort of the latest version. Yep.
Isn't that only limited to certain sets of customers that's approved? There's not it's
today.
Not GA to all consumers, right?
Yeah, today. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you got to. So today you got to get it approved. There's licensing requirements on how you go about licensing as well. So you know, like I said, that most of those conversations are actually for government entity type people. That's where most of those conversations are happening.
Next question from Rex is really about, you know, what's being done in 24H2 to improve the stability, resiliency, reliability around the core infrastructure like S2D, CSVs, FCM, healing CSVs, all of that.
Yeah, most of the, you know, if you were going to tell me that there was some kind of stability problem prior to 2509, I would probably disagree with you. After 2509, we would have to have a specific conversation around which problem are you actually having, because I'm not seeing, and I'm happy to be told that this is, you know, nonsense. I'm not seeing the problems that we had historically, like anything prior to 2509. I don't know if that's true for you guys, but I'm not hearing it like I used to hear it. And so as it relates to anything around that, if you're talking prior to 2509, then I would say get on 2509 and tell me if you still have the problem, because there's been an enormous amount of work around, you know, performance and availability, and, you know, all the telemetry and capturing what's not working, you know, putting in timers and checks and all the things that are supposed to be there. And so that's been a massive ongoing effort, which is what I did kind of talk about this, but that has been the ongoing effort for months now to improve all of that. So I don't know from the DataON side if you want to comment on that, but that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah,
I think
go ahead.
We saw some decent differences between the 11 dot and 12 dot release trains on, you know, how S2D handles itself.
Yeah, we just got fully updated to 2509. Definitely the issues were previous to that. So I was just wanting to hear, you know, what enhancements were made or, you know, going forward.
Yeah, there's an enormous amount of enhancements around that. But one of the key things was getting it in line with what the Azure core code is. And so we're all talking the same language, right? So it used to be a separate development track, but that went away. Right, so we basically upgraded you into what we're doing on the Azure Core OS side, and so a lot of the enhancements and stability that came from that. But that, you know, once again, it's the same code we're running in Azure, and so I anticipate that we're not going to see the same sort of problems that we had historically, because we don't see them in Azure. And also, once again, today on that new version, they're not widespread, right? So I'm not hearing. Like I said, if you were to tell me you had a problem prior to 509 or 2509, I would agree with you. You probably did.
Another thing is, you know, there's a decent bit public from last year around Windows Server 25 improvements. So all of those are part of that 12 dot train too. So the 70% lower CPU usage per IO, I think is the number they had set at Ignite. That's part of the 12 dot train now.
Yep. Same with the security. Same with the all of that stuff is in the. So anything you see on the that we talk publicly about Windows 2025 is basically it's the same code base, right? So, but once again, it also came from the Azure core side, and which is where we were getting that kind of performance.
Cool, thanks.
Next one is potentially interesting from Noah. How does Microsoft 365 Local tie in with hybrid setups like Entra ID Sync?
Well, I mean, it would. I mean, in theory, it's just like running Exchange on-prem, right? So, the while we're calling it M365 Local, if let's peel back the onion a bit, it's basically SharePoint on-prem, Exchange on-prem. All the stuff we've been doing for the last, give or take, 20 years, 40 years, how long we've been in the game. And so, it will run in a hybrid setup. It'll run in a disconnected setup. Most people, I don't think we're going to see many hybrid setups, if at all, because I don't think you're going to get approved for it unless you have a data residency requirement or something like that. And we don't have that in a region where you're making the claim, which is also why you have to sign up for it. Because there's a bunch of requirements. So, for example, you have to have an EA, you have to do this, you have to do that, right? There's a whole bunch of things that go with it. But I don't think we're going to see it in non-sovereign cloud environments, and I don't think we're going to see it unless it's disconnected. Okay. So that kind of gets rid of your Entra ID thing. Like while in practice you can do it, you're not going to get approved to get it supported.
Is it fair to say that M365 Local is really the on-prem features, but managed for you in a more simple way?
So I said again, the on-prem.
So it's like it is SharePoint on-prem, it's Exchange on-prem, but a lot of it's being managed for you.
No, you're managing it with M365 Local. You're managing it.
So what would be the customer's reason to do M365 Local over deploying Exchange on-prem and SharePoint on-prem VMs?
The argument is going to be around the sort of the feature set and the improvement and those kind of things it's going to split to whereby you're probably going to see the on-prem versions are basically going to fall into maintenance mode is what that's probably going to happen. So, like I said, there's a view of what this looks like today, and there's a view of this of what looks like this in a year. I think this is one of the things that because it's not GA, we have to keep an eye on. Well, it's not even public. It's not widely available. We need to keep an eye on what direction it is because it's already changed direction a number of times in the conversations I've been having about it. And so, while it's been announced, if you are not actively using it, I don't think you're close enough to, once again, that blast zone in order to really have good information about it. On what it is. And once again, if you have the requirement, you can sign up, you can get it, and all those kind of things. But most people who talk about it, it's like, well, you don't actually need it.
Got it.
And in part, it's not what you think it is, right?
Yep.
It's not the full M365 experience just on-prem, right? Which is when you hear it, that's from a marketing perspective, that's what you would think, but that's not the case. So,
Alan, thank you. I think we have questions. Go ahead.
Well, so we don't have any more customer questions, but I've got a couple we can give you. So one of the things that's been teased a bit is DataON cluster storage network management in the Azure portal. Is there anything you can tell them kind of what to expect there and what benefits that's going to bring?
No, other than watch your space. You might see some stuff at Ignite around that.
All right. we're often getting asked about Azure local to Azure local replication. So you mentioned Hyper-V replica. There was also a little bit on some of the investments in ASR. If someone was looking to do this kind of around Ignite end of the year timeframe, should they invest in getting Hyper-V replica all set up, or should they, hope for something maybe managed by the Azure portal?
So Hyper-V replica and all those kind of things get interesting next year when we turn on all of the Arc portability stuff, right? So there's going to be a lot of scenarios that show up with both VM level and storage level methods, both first and third party. A, once they're supported on the platform, and B, once we get Arc portability sort of running. There's a lot of discussion on all the different ways that we can sort of leverage that and how that looks, right? And so the site-to-site stuff is a big conversation, right? That's really where sort of the stretch clustering thing went. My view is that based on what we're talking about, what we're doing, we're going to be able to, while you're not going to call it stretch clustering directly, we can simulate exactly that, right? So, I would say, watch what we say at Ignite, and then look for some roadmap conversations later this year to see, what we're doing in that space. But I think based on all the things I'm talking about and talking to, and all the people I'm talking to, is that we kind of resolve that with that question.
So you mentioned all the awesome stuff about how new Arc SDN is better than, kind of the legacy SDN with virtual machines. But it doesn't yet have all of the legacy SDN features available through the Azure portal. Is there any, is the expectation that people are going to be able to get the same feature parity? Is there any sort of public timeline yet, or is that wait for Ignite?
Wait for Ignite. There is a let's have a look. I'd say wait for Ignite, but I mean, once again, if we look at North Star, right, it's all available in 100% available in the portal, 100% feature parity, 100% all moved over, right? And so that's kind of the goal. So if you look at internal sort of conversations around things like what SCCM does today, the internal teams that are on the engineering side no longer recommend SCCM. Never comes up. Right now, is it 100% all there? No, but it's like 99, whatever it is. Like it's mostly there with, once again, they're actively moving the bits that aren't there to there, right? And so most of that's prioritized based on what customers, customer demand. Like obviously, if everyone's complaining about one thing, they need this thing, they work on that first versus something else that's maybe further down the tree that only a few people use. But ultimately, the goal is 100%. Availability is the goal. 100% infrastructure management, 100% availability of features in the portal.
Okay. I think we're pretty much over the time. Alan, thank you so much. We can't wait until we get to Ignite and hear all the stuff. And thank you for everybody attending. Feel free to reach out to us anytime you want. Alan's always accessible if you want to have a call with them. But thank you for attending. We need to do this more often, Jeff. Seems like a lot of people's interested. But looking forward to see you guys on calls and Ignite. And thanks a lot. Have a good day.